You know that feeling. You try to calmly explain what hurt you. You search for fair words. You don't want to attack, but to be understood. Maybe you say something like, "That really hurt me," or, "That's not what I meant at all." And while you're trying to explain that, something strange happens. The conversation suddenly takes a turn. Things are twisted. Statements are reinterpreted. And in the end, you're left standing there, and you suddenly feel like you're the one to blame. Many people describe this exact moment with a picture. It feels like fighting windmills. You're making an effort. You're explaining. You're arguing. But no matter what you say, it won't get you anywhere. On the contrary, often it only gets worse. And at some point you're standing there and you ask yourself, why doesn't that work? Why does it seem completely impossible for some people to have a normal conversation? That's exactly what this video is about. Because when you're dealing with a narcissist, the problem isn't that you're not explaining yourself well enough. The problem lies much deeper. Many people go into such conversations with a very specific expectation. They believe, if I express myself clearly enough, if I remain calm, if I find the right words, then the other person will eventually understand what I mean. That's a perfectly understandable thought. Because that's how normal conversations work. Two people exchange ideas. They listen to each other. They try to understand what the other person means. And sometimes you actually realized, okay, maybe I saw that wrong, but this principle doesn't work with narcissists. Not because you express yourself poorly, but because these conversations serve a completely different purpose for them. When a narcissist argues, it's rarely about finding a solution. It's not about resolving something together. It's about something entirely different. It's about control. It's about superiority. And it's about power. This means that while you are trying to solve one problem, the other person is playing a completely different game. You think it's about the topic. But in reality, it's about hierarchy. About who's at the top, and who's at the bottom. If you are interested in the topic of narcissism and want to understand how such dynamics really work, then you can also check out my Narcissism 7-Day Challenge. Many people use this challenge to clearly understand for the first time what actually happens in such relationships. And if you find yourself in a difficult situation, you can also book a clarity call. There, we'll look together at what's going on with you. If you're interested in topics like this, then please subscribe to the channel and stay tuned. Because in the next few minutes, we're going to look at something that many people only realize very late. The biggest mistake you can make when dealing with narcissists. The biggest mistake many people make when dealing with narcissists is actually a very human reflex. They begin to argue. They try to explain what happened. They try to explain why they are hurt. They try to convince the other person that their behavior was wrong. Maybe you say something like, "You were flirting with my best friend earlier. That really hurt me." Or, "You can't talk to me like that." And a very simple thought is running through your head. You hope that at some point the other person will say, "Okay, now I understand what you mean." But with a narcissist, that exact moment almost never comes. Because the moment you start arguing, you've already entered a game you can't win. You explain more. The narcissist twists things more. You try to remain calmer. The narcissist becomes more personal. You try even harder to be understood. And that's exactly the point where many people realize, something's not right here. Because no matter how hard you try, the conversation just isn't progressing. And while you're putting more and more energy into it, it seems like nothing is getting through to the other person. If you take a step back and look at these conversations objectively, you'll eventually notice something. These discussions aren't really about the topic at hand. They're not about clarifying anything. It's not about finding a solution together. And it's not about truly understanding the other person either. For a narcissist, a discussion is often something completely different. It's a power game. While you try to explain what happened, the narcissist in the background is only concerned with one single question: who is on top, and who is on the bottom? That's why many of these discussions seem to arise out of nowhere. Maybe you know the feeling. Just a moment ago everything was calm. The conversation was normal. Maybe you even laughed. And suddenly the mood changes. A comment. A critique. A little dig. And you sit there thinking, where did that suddenly come from? For many people, this seems completely illogical. But when you understand that it's not about the topic itself, but about control, a lot of things suddenly make sense. A narcissist quickly feels threatened when someone appears calm, confident, or self-assured. And that's often when this game begins. A discussion is opened. An accusation is made. A situation is twisted. Not to clarify anything, but to restore the hierarchy. A particularly typical tool of narcissists in such conversations is certain types of questions. At first glance, they might seem harmless. But if you look more closely, you quickly realize these questions aren't actually designed to elicit an answer. Perhaps you have heard phrases like, "What's wrong with you?" or "Why didn't you do better?" Sometimes you hear something like, "Who whispered that to you?" or "Have you actually understood what I've told you so many times already?" When you hear these questions, the impulse to answer them arises automatically. You start to explain. You start to justify yourself. You try to clarify what you actually meant. But that's precisely the point. These questions aren't about exchanging information. The narcissist doesn't actually want to know why you did something at this moment. Nor does he want to understand how you feel. The real purpose of these questions is something else entirely. They're designed to unsettle you. They're meant to put you on the defensive. And they're meant to portray you in a light where you suddenly have to justify yourself. So, while you try to explain your position, the dynamic of the conversation slowly shifts. And suddenly, you're no longer the one raising the issue. You're the one defending yourself. Once you get caught in this conversation pattern, something often develops that many people later describe as a hamster wheel. At the beginning, there's just a small conflict. You bring something up. Perhaps you calmly say what hurt you. But instead of the conversation leading to clarification, something else happens. The narcissist twists the topic. Suddenly, it's no longer about what happened. Instead, the conversation focuses on what you supposedly did wrong. You try to set the record straight. You explain again what you actually meant. But as you explain, the conversation becomes increasingly chaotic. The narcissist introduces new accusations. He brings up things that might be weeks or months in the past. And while you're trying to bring order to the conversation step by step, something very typical happens. You are slowly losing your balance. You are becoming insecure. You are becoming more emotional. You are starting to defend yourself. And that's precisely the moment when the hamster wheel really starts spinning. Because while you're putting more and more energy into the conversation, it seems like nothing is getting through to the other person. Everything just bounces off. And in the end, you're often left standing there feeling completely exhausted. While the narcissist shakes himself off once, and simply carries on as if nothing had happened. Many people cling to a particular hope for a very long time. They think, maybe he'll understand someday. Maybe he'll realize someday what his behavior triggers in me. Maybe he'll realize someday how hurtful all of this is. This hope is very human. Because in normal relationships, exactly that happens. People can eventually understand that they've hurt someone else. They can take responsibility. And sometimes they even say, "Now I understand why that affected you so much." But with a narcissist, this exact step happens very rarely. And there are two reasons for this. The first reason is a lack of empathy. A narcissist often can't truly understand what another person is going through emotionally. Other people's feelings aren't really experienced, at best, they're observed. The second reason is a lack of self-reflection. A narcissist usually doesn't see themselves as part of the problem. If something goes wrong, the cause almost always lies with someone else. With you. With the circumstances. With the situation. But rarely with themselves. That's why the hope that a narcissist will one day suddenly say, "You're right. I behaved wrongly," is so often shrouded in hope. For many people, it's a very painful illusion. You wait for a moment that, in many cases, simply never comes. You could also say, waiting for a narcissist to have an epiphany is a bit like waiting for the end of the world. Many people realize very early on that something isn't right in these conversations. Even before they can rationally explain it, a very specific feeling often arises. A discomfort. An inner resistance. Perhaps you know this feeling. The other person says something, for example, "What's wrong with you?" And even before you answer, you sense, something's not right here. You might not even be able to explain exactly why this sentence seems so strange. But your gut feeling reacts immediately. It feels like a small inner alarm. But right at this point, something happens that many people later regret. They ignore this feeling. Instead, they try to solve the situation rationally. They start explaining, arguing, or justifying themselves. And while they try to conduct the conversation logically, another game is already being played out in the background. The narcissist is trying to pull you away from your inner balance. To unsettle you. To stir up your emotions. And the more you give into it, the further you distance yourself from your true self. That's why this gut feeling is often an important indicator. Not everything that sounds like a question actually is one. Sometimes it's simply a tool to create pressure. And your body often notices this much sooner than your mind. Once you truly understand all these dynamics, you arrive at a realization that is initially difficult for many people to accept. Arguing with a narcissist doesn't work. Not because you express yourself poorly. Not because your arguments aren't logical enough. But because arguing simply isn't the right tool in this situation. Many people believe they just need to explain their point more clearly. But this is precisely how they get drawn deeper into the narcissist's game. Every argument opens a new point of attack. Every explanation can be twisted. And every justification puts you even further on the defensive. The strategy that truly works, therefore, looks quite different. It doesn't consist of arguing better. It consists of not playing the game at all. Practically speaking, this can mean simply ending the conversation. That you say, "This conversation isn't going anywhere." Or that you realize your gut feeling is triggering that inner alarm again, and you consciously decide to get out of the situation. Sometimes that means simply getting up and leaving the room. Or ending a phone call. Most people are terrified of taking this step. They think it's a sign of weakness. But in reality, it's often quite the opposite. Because strength in such moments doesn't mean having the last word. Strength means staying true to yourself. If you've tried for a long time to reason with a narcissist, it often feels like you're constantly losing. You explain yourself. You make an effort. You try to be fair. And yet, every conversation ends with you exhausted, while the narcissist seems unaffected. The reason is simple. In these discussions, the one with the better arguments doesn't win. Only the one who sets the rules of the game can win. And that's precisely why the most important insight when dealing with narcissists is something completely different. It's not about being right. It's not about convincing the other person. And it's not about finally being understood. The real goal is much simpler: to stay true to yourself. To avoid losing your own inner balance. And to stop getting caught in this hamster wheel of justification, explanation, and defense. Because this hamster wheel is precisely where narcissists exert their power. I'd really like to know if you've ever experienced situations like this. Have you ever tried to discuss something with a narcissist, and eventually realized that the conversation was just going in circles? That no matter what you say, it will all end up being used against you. If you've had similar experiences, please share them in the comments. Sharing these experiences among viewers helps many people realize they're not alone. If this video helped you, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for being here today.